Well, hi, all my lovely, lovely indoor folk. It's Combo here. I've switched it up a little bit. I decided that I really wanted to stay up the other night and play Dark Souls 2, but not really record given the grave hour that I was doing it at. So, what I did is I pre-recorded everything, and, well, I'll just be talking over it for now. Now, a lot of this will also include some backtracking I did, and some minor collections, because this one was kind of me faffing about. The last video I uploaded, I kind of nutted into about 4 bosses, and that was 4 bosses in one video. So this one turns into more of a, oh, okay, transversal, what's where, how can I get it, and why. I keep on forgetting the route to the Lost Sinner, so I went back thinking, oh, the Lost Bastille, Lost Sinner, I'm pretty lost, we all have that in common, and that's what led me to sort of wandering about here for a bit. And I keep on forgetting that the archers have flaming arrows, and that's why that explosion had caught me at that point in time. After surmising that there was no drops, I started wandering this way, completely forgetting what was up ahead. And to be honest, it's one of the questionable choices they have for the layout of this map, that they decided to have an interlocking section that neither lets you go forward nor backward through the area that it's actually connected to. And the area that I'm referring to is one that'll be shown later in this video, which is No Man's Wharf. No Man's Wharf will be featured towards, I'd give it the middle way, and it's predominantly what I'll be recording on after I leave through this area here. The only reason I say that is if you watch, I'll go ahead and enter this lift. And it is a comedically placed lift that goes from a Lost Bastille that you don't really understand where it sits geographically. You're given that it's somewhat of an island gulag prison type situation. You know, the equivalent of an islanded version of the Undead Asylum from Dark Souls 1. And then if you take the lift down, there's the Vengarians, which are these sort of not Celtic, not Vikings, who are dual-wielding dex boys, or they have a pretty shitty shield and sword combo. Now, skipping ahead a bit, I went ahead, and after working with the traitor that I picked up from Hein's Tower of Flame, I had her move the path over, and this leads us to Huntsman's Corpse. Now, this area is oddly low level now that I've realized that the pathway was supposed to have you progress somewhat unnaturally from Hein's Tower of Flame to actually diving to this one instead of doing the path I took. So when I walked in here with a +5 Hide Knight sword, I kind of one-shotted a lot of things on my way in. Oh, copes. It's Huntsman's Copes. Ah, forgot about that tongue twister. Now, I didn't light a lot of these things because I was thinking that I was going to do all this off-screen. As you can see, my decision-making skills aren't always the best, and sometimes, just like that corpse on the ground, I miss a couple times. But I do hit some of the time. 60% of the time, it works 100% of the time. And you notice that there's suddenly a pattern of the first early areas of Huntsman's Copse, and that's, oh, this is a quirky tunnel full of poison. And the poison is produced by these little butterflies. One good spell, I honestly didn't need to use the Great Soul Arrow. I think I was just flexing really hard on those butterflies. It's not remotely needed. But that's what I was using at the time. After you beat up the homeless a little bit and take their life force from them, you can also do what I'm doing. This is why I really like binoculars, because they make wizards very useful, because they can just free aim their shots and go, hey, I can see you. Hey, what are you doing? And it also destroys objects, reveals hidden paths, just like it would if you were to make a basic melee attack. And my personal favorite is there's a level later where there are boulders suspended that are normally set off by some undead. Except you can set it off for them when you do spell sniping. And thus the area becomes infinitely less difficult and much more trivial. It's just something I like. I enjoy the concept of just going and thinking my way out of a situation. Rather than being ambushed by this fellow here, I just chose to shoot him. And, well, he almost died from it. I would have laughed if that fall damage right there had done the trick. But sadly it did not, so I tried stabbing him with a pair of binoculars. That didn't work. And then he just met his end. Well, his first end. This is my first run through of this area that we're watching right now. And to be honest, he'll be killed plenty of more times when I farm him later off screen. Oh, what do you know? They've breached the walls! Oh, no they didn't. What a bunch of wimps. Oh, look at all these homeless people. Ah. What a good stance on homelessness this game gives me. Oh, I don't know you, where you came from, or if this is your home. Well, pardon me, cutting through. There's this murder hobo who's wiggling his magic stick and his lightning sword's just like, yeah, that's what I'm doing here. And that rogue right there had been a little bit too excited. And so was I, completely missing and paying the price for that. I find it funny that these bandits, rogues, and highwaymen that you'll see throughout the Huntsman's Copse, they use a lot of clubs. A lot of big clubs that aren't blackjacks, and it's kind of funny to watch because, you know, when you think rogue, you tend to think, oh, well, this is somebody that's really dexterous. They're going to be dual-wielding daggers or using rapiers and having some highfalutin / very deft movements. And like, nah, I got the stick. Kablams. Now, this is a little bit of a workaround, but I find this way to be a lot easier than actually going the route the game expects you to go. Now you'll notice, oh, yet again, another chasm. This is me going, nah, we don't need that. Butterflies, poison, no, none of that, we don't need it. And then you can see there's an undead wielding a torch. I always like farming them as well. This way I could have like 45 minutes to an hour of time on my torch if I can collect more torches. It's kind of a weird mechanic given the lighting in most levels doesn't matter unless you're in Baby Blighttown or the even more annoying equivalent of Blighttown that I'll be diving in later. And that will be infuriating. Well, not as infuriating as the Shrine of Almana, but when I get there, you'll know. Now this is a giant basilisk. It's the only one of its kind, and it exists just here in the Huntsman's Copse. It's the most unique thing in this particular area for the first part of the Copse. The thing about it is, I've always been a huge coward when dealing with it because I'm like, big size, big melee. I don't want to deal with a mini-boss like that. Fuck that noise. So, I do this little coward strafe that you see me doing where I just kind of sit back and I start casting spells at it. Because I read a good book once, and that book was Magic Missile, as you can see here. The thing is, I probably could have gone down and killed it in a couple swipes by the look of things. I always underestimate that. It's between that and the fire lizards that you can find within the castle walls at the Forest of Fallen Giants. Yep, after a while I decided, okay, pull out shield that has 90% physical resistance. It's a different one than the Dranlaic one I'm using normally, because I like this one. It increases item drop rates, which is something I find to be important when I just care about money. Unlike that, it drops nothing remarkable. I think it was literally just that large Titanite shard. Yeah, it was. Pointless. But what is very important in here is what I came here for. It's my favorite weapon, and I want to see if I can incorporate it. It's Ricard's Rapier from Dark Souls 1. Now, the only thing that's special about that is its moveset. But if you can see, this is what I was talking about earlier. There's a secret wall that leads to a cave entrance. That could have been a very interesting arrangement. And then from the cave wall you are open to this small space that you had to have taken a lift to get to, which was then put in front of another similar cavernous room that I was afraid of. You see, the textures on the floor make me think there's holes where there aren't when I was playing at the time in the dark. And that's why I turned around. Oh, and hey, look! Another secret door! So, instead of just progressing through the exterior as I did, just dropping down a hole, sniping, dropping down a hole, coup de grace, open a chest, get what the whole point of the travel was, you had to somehow circumvent this section of the mansion earlier on, find a secret door, which by the way is an invisible illusory wall that you can only find if you press X up against a wall with, and then after doing that you take a lift down, hopefully not falling down the hole that's near the lift on the other side, find another illusory wall and another one-off cavernous section that you could always assume is just a dead end because they put dead ends in here all the time. And after trusting yourself that much, you would be met with a giant basilisk you would have to fight in single combat while poison is raining down on you. So you would have to deal with 2 status effects: poison, petrification, and big-ass monsters. Or you would just do what I did. I did it that way because it was the easiest for me. Now, there's going to be 2 splices coming up here as well. No Man's Wharf is Blighttown Jr. It's Poor Man's Blighttown, and it's a very loosely based area set around a mechanic involving light. You might notice that light is put in very sparingly. It's in this interior area. And despite me tanking a lot of damage, I made sure to save up on a lot of drugs, all of those little life gems that I'll just be crunching in the future. Now, the whole thing about this is that this area is actually subterranean of sorts. It's a... I won't call it a prison town, but I will say that it's sort of a refuge for people that King Vendrick of Drenlaic, apparently, in the lore, enslaved these Vikings to do his piracy for him. As he laid siege, he might have used them to steal the Throne of Want, an object we'll be reaching later on in the game. And these particular mercenaries may have been a part of that. Mercenaries. I don't know why I tried to do that inflection. It just comes out. So these mercenaries, these Vikings, they're rough and tumble customers, but they went hollow just like everyone else. It's one of those things that aren't really talked about. Often, whenever you're playing a character in a Souls game, society is falling apart, or it already has. Civilization, in some way or another, has collapsed, and the world's on its last legs every single time you play, which is a weird contradiction, because how many times can the world end, right? Well, aside from that tangent, it's the end of days, and we will never, aside from some convolutions in this particular game, we will run into not a lot of exposure to how society would have been pre-hollowification, pre-Undead Scourge. Then again, in this game, being undead isn't treated as a curse, may say, but it does treat things as a very strange complication. Just because, well, initially, from the opening, it can be... you can have some conjecture that maybe your character is traveling back in time to when things in Drenlaic weren't just a pile of ruinous stone. The thing is, as the load screens would tell you, the timeline here is incredibly convoluted. You come back possibly in time and or space to a slightly better period, and you'll do so again. In-game. In this specific game. It's not like Dark Souls 3, where everything will remain within one timeline, and then the DLC's like, actually, you're gonna go ahead a little bit. or you'll walk into alternate timelines or alternate concepts of situations and maps. Because Dark Souls 3 does that quite a bit, where things get wibbly wobbly pretty. Because someone said, well, this would look really good as concept art. I'm like, concept art, make it the real thing. And that's how that sort of happens sometimes. And you'll actually run into a lot of surface level things like that. Oh, I'm gonna shut up.
You haven't changed a bit, have you? The longer I am here, a wretched place indeed. What could have caused such... Ah, yes. I have not... This is for you. Of course, Our land of Mirror is surrounded by enemies, and constantly at war. There is only one way up in Mirror. Join the Order and prove yourself in battle. My family had little fortune and no name. With two things. My sword and my loyalty to my lord. I was raised to wield a sword from birth. Life was hard, but I never gave it a second thought. I had swift success on the battlefield and quickly attained respectable stature. And then I came... Have you heard of the undead? These poor souls affected by the curse. An undead gradually loses his humanity. Finally, he turns hollow and preys upon others. And a hollow can never be human again. One can skirt this wicked fate only with the help of the souls found here. Assuming, of course, that the legends are true, I can only hope that they are.
As you saw there with Flugatil, she's hollowing. Now, hollowing in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 is treated in two different ways. In this one, it's a lot more melodramatic and depressing. Dark Souls 1 is largely a theme on humanity. I forgot I lit a torch while I was covered in oil. That's fucking stellar. Good job, me. Anywho, the message of Dark Souls 1 is humanity and being able to realize that humanity will persevere no matter what obstacle overcomes them. In Dark Souls 2, there's multiple things because it's kind of a meatloaf. They took various different ingredients of their ideas for narratives and they kind of just meatloafed it up. It's all just sort of kitchen sinked in a little bit. There's themes about light and darkness. There's themes on kings and queens as far as level design goes. You'll find a lot of pairs. The way the Abyss and the Great Darkness is portrayed is somewhat friendly and becoming at first, almost like it's less terrorizing or all-encompassing death and more just a different way of life, given that the fragments of Manus, the fragments of the Abyss, are people in this game, which is a weird choice in that they're all women who become queens to important men. And they end up manipulating these men to their doom, and their doom causes various kingdoms to fall apart. But hollowing in this one is treated almost like a mental disorder, / it's a loss of identity or motivation, which is traditional hollowing, that's fine. But the way it's treated in this game, there's more angst and anguish about it. It's a tragedy when characters hollow because you ultimately, as the player character, have to kill them. Or they become mindless, brainless, they lack their ambition. They're essentially just walking habitual zombies. Which is bad. Sure, oversimplification, that's bad. Yeah. As I kill these nightmarish creatures, I'll just keep talking about someone going, I can't remember things. But that's a terrible thing. I mean, the intro of this game is supposedly trying to establish your character had a family, maybe a wife or a mother, and carrying a child, but their images waste away from you. You don't remember them. You're transforming into something empty, not just spiritually, but emotionally. From a personal level, your personality wastes away. And I find that concept to be enthralling, dramatic, yes, but I also find it that that doesn't always happen, especially if the NPCs who have to be justified in fighting. When you come across the royal guards, like the one that I'm currently wearing a helmet from, all they remember is the one thing that they were taught to do. They remember that they have to guard the castle even if it's in disrepair, and so they do. You come across various armored knights who have gone hollow, but their main goal was to just guard an area. So they do. So it seems that while hollowing will strip the excess emotions away from you in these Souls games, often, if you're trained to do something, or if it's a very strong defining characteristic, a portion of it remains. So it's ultimately a gross simplification for AI that seems to have repeated habitual habits, almost like it was used to explain away gameplay details. And I can see that. I can see that a little bit. But that's not a criticism I completely hate. I still like the series, even if it may be that the central contrivance for you fearing your own death, despite being a video game character who is immortal, and turning into a green, rotting, I don't know, piece of beef jerky, it's ultimately not a threat. At least not to the player, because the only time in canon that you would completely go hollow and forget who you are is if you just stop playing. Which I do kind of like thematically, because it incentivizes you to come back, otherwise it can be thought of that among the millions of other hollows that have gone, it's everyone's characters that they've just let go. When you give up, and the puzzle is too hard, or the enemy's too strong, and you quit the game and you just rage out, you've gone hollow. And that's kind of cool. And understandable in an area like this, just because things get a little convoluted as you start scaling upward and upward to go downward and downward. But that's kind of what I like about Dark Souls 2. It's very fanciful. You would find Dark Souls 1 to be pretty realistic to some extent, as far as the physics and the layout of things. I mean, there's some annoying contrivances with, like, Sen's Fortress, or the very big areas of Anor Londo when you go there and you're walking across beams that are like 2 steps wide. Or the other bullshit once you go to Sif's Fortress and you have to walk across the invisible walkways, making sure you can just follow with the seeing stones. Or the drips of water like I tried using when I played it and was disgusted with that game. Because it did not age well. To some extent, this game doesn't age well, but I like its mechanics. I like the way it feels. And it was my first Souls game, so I'm always going to romanticize it and ignore a lot of criticisms other people do, because that's what fans do sometimes. Although, I suppose I've also been criticizing it a lot throughout this little snippet of me thinking out loud. But I think that's the nature of good criticism. It's not meant to derail or actually tear down something. It's to assert its value. You want to understand exactly what it is meaning, what is the central idea behind something for it to exist. And yes, you can say it is of low quality, no quality, or good quality. But you have to be able to explain why that is. Given that it's incredibly subjective, and oh, Gavlon! Yay! While it's incredibly subjective, it is still an opinion. I just feel that it needs to be supported. There needs to be no fallacies when it comes to criticism. No oversimplifications, no strawmen, no false cause. Just strong, supportive, not quite video essay, but in there, commentaries, monologues. Shit I'm trying to do, I suppose. Anyway, a quick little side note. Gavlon is the only person in the game that I can think of that is a friendly dwarf. Yes, he is a dwarf in a Dark Souls game. The dwarves only show up in Dark Souls 2. And you can even fight some later. Oh, and that corpse scared me. That's why I went, oh, whoa, what is that? I kind of like these guys too, considering they're just ninja guts with that berserker armor-like head on them. I'm like, oh, hey, someone likes Berserk? Huh, in Dark Souls? Never knew. But Gavlon also is the only person you can sell things to. He's your main merchant for selling things and acquiring poison-related projectiles, which is something you want. You want as much of, because you'll need it for various parts of farming, or to get through tough areas you don't know what to do with, because as soon as you happen to have the stats for a bow, which I do. At this point, Fortinbras III is in his, I want to say, late to mid 80s as far as levels go, and I made him very much able to wield a bow. I think he can use a short bow or a Bellkeeper bow, since that one had the lowest stat requirements. I think that was a 5 in strength and 11 in dexterity. Pretty easy shit, really. Regardless, you want that because it'll make things a lot easier. Now, if you notice, these drums, these pots that are made out of, that are filled with poison, I circumvented encountering them by just shooting them. That will happen a lot in the Black Gulch. Once we head our way to fight the Butcher, yeah, you're going to see me do that a lot. In fact, I'm pretty sure after I finished recording this section here, and I took care of the upcoming boss, I made sure to buy a lot of spells from this next vendor, this next, not quite mentor type, because it's not like that in Dark Souls. But there's a spell vendor, a wizard that you can walk into that can give you more spells. I bought, I think, 3 or 4 spells from him, and it's really interesting the way Dark Souls 2 does it. Depending on your intelligence and on your attunement, you'll get a certain number of pips per spell. But if you have 2 of the same spell in enough slots, you can actually go through and equip the same spell twice, doubling their total. Now, one thing, I think it's attunement or it's intelligence. Actually, I think it's attunement, intelligence, and faith. That all, if you start investing in them in heavy amounts, they start adding pips to your total amount. So, base-wise, you can cast Soul Arrow 30 times. If you put enough pips in intelligence, you get 1 extra cast. So that might be 31. Or 32, depending on how well you are now attuned / intelligent enough to use or have such faith in your abilities as a caster. And then there's the in-lore reasons for spellcasting that I kind of like, because I actually do love the system of how Dark Souls 2 deals, well, just Dark Souls in general, deals with spellcasting, because, okay, sure, you have to be smart enough to read a scroll, and then once you read the scroll, you memorize it, and that's why it's in your spell slot. You've sat down and you've attuned yourself, you've thought about a spell that's pretty good. Excuse me. And once you've done that and you've worked on your spell book, you go out into the world and you're like, I remember how to use this! And you start casting. And it seems a lot more, I want to say, dedicated to the process, because you could actually treat the spell slot up there in your little HUD area in the corner of the left-hand side of the screen. You could treat that upper square as just a book that you're leafing through, and these particular pages are what you remember most. Yeah, that was the vendor I was mentioning, Calhoun of the Fold, and look at that fucked up hitbox. That pissed me off so much when I was just trying to make my way through to the boss room. I was like, oh, well, he's clearly thrusting into that stairway. I won't have a problem. And then many problems occurred, as they are wont to do. Now, I let Lucatiel join me on this one. And the reason you want Lucatiel to be in a lot of boss rooms is that she actually has a side quest that requires you to summon her and have her not die in 3 boss battles. In the process of doing that, she'll be accessible to more or less finalize her quest line, and you'll get her equipment and her sword. which is really good in Dark Souls 3, by the way. The Hollow Slayer Greatsword in Dark Souls 3, that is a good early game weapon because it deals extra damage to anyone that's hollow, which is like 3/4 of the bosses. Well, I might be exaggerating like a ton, but still, it is a good weapon, and it has the similar movesets of greatswords that are two-handed in this game, which gives it more of a vertical hitbox that's just straightforward with safe reach in Dark Souls 3. Ah, shit, now I want to play Dark Souls 3 again. God damn it. Oh well. I'll get to that. Now, Flex Steel Sentry, or Flex Style Sentry, I'll probably say Flex Style Sentry. That's a RE boss that just seems very convoluted. I suppose that makes me Leon because I got a pretty good butt. But as far as things go, both sides are pretty even-ended. I happen to like facing the curved sword side a bit more because it seems like he has more straightforward stuff. Club Boy likes blocking attacks every now and again. But the main thing to watch out for is when he starts doing those twist batches, because then when he spins like that and his backside hits you, you can still be hit by the Mace Boy. The Mace Boy's got good reach, he's just slow, so had I just dodged properly, I'd be fine. But he does a lot of straightforward vertical hits, whereas, of course, his other side does horizontals. But every now and again, they like to switch it up a little bit and be goofy by having him do leading attacks, smashing from the back, or thrusting from the back like a pincer stance that we saw earlier. At this point, I was laming it out like a coward, and started casting, just everywhere. And Lugateal's like, alright, I'm just gonna start blocking in front of you, because that's how I tell you I'm going to leave now. We're good friends. We're good friends. So through this somewhat forgettable area that's largely just nighttime, dark blue, dark gray, and boat, along with these magical lanterns that are never explained, it just looks like it's magical soul energy that's been put into a fucking lantern and just hung about all over this ghost ship. It's pretty cool looking. Too bad we'll never know what that means. Anyway, this video is about done. Thanks for tuning in. I'll probably post a bit more considering I'm spending a lot of time indoors, as I'm sure all of you all are doing at the time of this video, possibly in the future, who really knows. Anyway, take care, wash your hands, be careful, and stay healthy, stay happy. Adios.